Welcome everyone to another edition of the Classic Comic Archive, a series where I recap and review many of Marvel Comics' most seminal early issues. Our story for today is Tales to Astonish 44, cover dated June of 1963. This issue marks the first appearance of Ant-Man's longtime partner, the Wasp, and was written by Stan Lee and Ernie Hart, drawn by Jack Kirby, inked by Don Heck, and lettered by Art Simic. Our issue opens up with a striking splash panel, teasing Ant-Man and the Wasp's coming battle with the creature from Cosmos. But before we can witness such an epic showdown, we must first travel to the laboratory of Dr. Hank Pym. He's just come back from a very tiring adventure as Ant-Man, so once restored to normal size, he slumps down in a chair and lets his mind wander. He thinks back to his late wife Maria, and the tragic circumstances that led to her death. Maria was the daughter of a prominent geneticist in communist Hungary. She and her father were political prisoners there, but they escaped to America, and that's where she fell in love with Pym. Yet she yearned to return to her homeland, so on their honeymoon, she convinced him to take her back to Hungary. Hank was naturally concerned for her safety, but she assured him that she'd be fine. But she was wrong, as midway through their trip, she was kidnapped by communist agents. Hank tried to stop them, but was pistol-whipped in the back of the head. It's unclear what happened next, but somehow he ended up in the American embassy only an hour later, with his head covered in bandages. He begged the ambassador for help in finding his wife, but was informed that she'd already been found dead. Consumed by a vengeful fury, Pym vowed to make those responsible pay. Yet after several days of aimless wandering, all he did was land himself in a Hungarian jail, on the verge of a complete mental and physical breakdown. He was luckily bailed out by the embassy and sent home, but never got his revenge on the ones who killed his wife. Yet the whole ordeal inspired him to make a change, as never again would he feel so powerless, and never again would he stand by as injustice ran rampant. He would use his scientific expertise to become something greater, something to inspire hope and vanquish villainy. So he got to work, and over the course of several months, developed Ant-Man's equipment and persona. But despite his many victories since, there's still something missing. What he needs is a partner, someone who can back him up, and take over if he's ever taken out. But who could he possibly trust with the secret of his true identity? Well, he's not quite sure, but what he does know, is that his partner will need a set of powers unto themselves. So he returns to his lab once more, and this time, begins experimenting with the biology of wasps. He continues this research for weeks, until one day, his work is interrupted by the sudden ring of his doorbell. The man at the door is Dr. Vernon Van Dyne, a scientist, but one whom Pym has never met. Accompanying Van Dyne is his daughter Janet, who bears a striking resemblance to Maria, albeit much younger. He's come to enlist Pym's aid in an experiment, as he's been working on a space beam which can detect signals from potential alien life. But his beam needs strengthening, and thus he's come to Pym for help. But Pym tells him that he's not of much use, as his expertise is in molecular cell transition and specialization. He's not an astronomer, and can't offer much of a solution. So a disappointed Van Dyne thanks Pym for his time, and returns to his laboratory with Janet. He then lets her leave for a night of dancing, but remains himself to work on the beam. And so he works and works, until finally, he manages to boost his beam into deep space. But things quickly go wrong, as a creature hijacks the beam, and uses it to travel to his laboratory. It doesn't say its name, but reveals that it's the greatest criminal on a planet called Cosmos. It nearly succeeded in enslaving its own race, but was imprisoned. But now it's escaped, and is planning to do on Earth what it failed to on Cosmos. Thus it must kill Van Dyne and destroy the space beam, lest he announce its presence on Earth, or be pursued by any of its own people. So it forces him to look into his eyes. A gaze that is deadly. With that, the issue shifts forward a few hours later, as Janet's back from her night out, and has noticed a strange gas emanating from her father's laboratory. So she rushes in to see what's happened, and tragically discovers her father's body. The creature from Cosmos is nowhere to be found, but she can tell that her father's death wasn't an accident, or even a run-of-the-mill murder. So with no one else to turn to, she decides to call Dr. Pym, as he's a scientist and might be able to piece together what happened. But when she tells him of her father's death, he thinks that she's just pulling a tasteless prank, so he hangs up on her. But luckily his aunts intervene, as they're constantly monitoring danger across the city, and tell him that she wasn't lying. So of course he goes to help, but decides he's of more use as Ant-Man than Dr. Pym. Janet doesn't mind, as she lets him into the lab, and to her father's body all the same. Inspecting it, and the destroyed space beam, Ant-Man comes to the same conclusion that Janet had. Dr. Van Dyne was killed by an unearthly, alien menace. Now that they're on the same page, Janet declares that she only wants one thing: revenge. Ant-Man, surprised by this fiery passion, as when they'd first met, she acted like a flighty, impatient brat. But now she's shown herself to be a person of determination and strength. It's qualities that remind him of Maria, and make him wonder if she'd be a good partner. But now's not the time to decide, as he then orders her to call the FBI, and head to the laboratory of Hank Pym. He then leaves to meet her there, but notices that all of his ants are gone. He's several stories up a skyscraper, and they'd usually be there to take him down. But for some reason they've left, so he's got no choice but to shimmy his way down. He eventually meets up with them on the street, and they tell him that whatever creature was inside the lab has been secreting a mist of formic acid. Formic acid is the same substance that makes up ant venom, yet for some reason, they're afraid of it. Ant-Man keeps this oddity in the back of his mind, and then orders his ants to spread out and look for the creature. In the meantime, he needs to get back to his laboratory and meet with Janet. So he rides a lone ant back to the lab, and grows to normal size just as she arrives. He then lets her in, and takes off a robe to reveal that he's Ant-Man. Thus it becomes obvious why she's there, as Pym offers her the chance to become his partner, and avenge the death of her father. She readily accepts. And so Pym takes her to a special projector. It casts an image of synthetic cells which he's developed. They're derived from wasps, and when implanted below the skin tissue, can give a person wings and antennae, but they'll only emerge when shrunk to ant size. With them, Janet can become a hero equal to Ant-Man, yet still excel in ways that he can't. They'll make a perfect team, and Janet knows it. So she agrees to have the cells implanted, but while she's undergoing the implantation procedure, havoc is breaking loose at the docks. The creature from Cosmos has finally emerged, and it's destroying everything in its path. Pym's quickly alerted to the unfolding chaos, and so once Janet's ready, he directs her to a pre-made costume. She hurriedly puts it on, inhales some shrinking gas, and then heads with Ant-Man for the George Washington Bridge, where the creature's battling the military. Yet while she's excited for her first adventure, she's still a little nervous, and knows that she might suffer the same fate as her father. So on their way to the bridge, she unabashedly tells Pym that she's falling in love with him. He of course rejects her, as although she reminds him of his beloved Maria, she's far too young to be his lover. But that doesn't matter now, as the pair have just arrived at the bridge, and linked up with a group of ants. Yet the tiny insects won't be of much help, as something about the creature is preventing them from approaching. Ant-Man knows that without their help, their battle is gonna be a lot tougher. So he takes a second to adjust his plan, right as the military fires on the creature. Yet their weapons are completely useless, as shells and bullets seem to pass right through it. Thus Ant-Man realizes that he and the Wasp have come in blind, and won't be able to take it down with their powers alone. But the Wasp interprets this hesitation as cowardice, so she, fueled by vengeance and a desire to prove that she's not a child, rushes to face the creature head-on. But all this does is confirm that she's a brash and foolish girl, as the creature quickly overpowers her, and compels her to stare into its deadly eyes. She's just barely saved by Ant-Man, as he jumps off the bridge, and yanks her gaze away from the creature. The two then land on a flying ant, which takes them back to the laboratory. While it seems that their outing was a complete failure, Pym was at least able to confirm that the creature's mainly composed of formic acid. As I previously mentioned, formic acid is a component of ant venom. Thus what Pym realizes is that if ant venom has a known antidote, then the creature should too. So within minutes, he cooks up an antidote, and pours it into a bunch of empty shotgun shells. He then orders his ants to take the shells, and of course a shotgun itself, to Wall Street. That's where the creature's headed, and that's where he and the Wasp are going to finally beat it. So once there, he and his ants climb up a nearby building, and aim the shotgun right at the creature. They then wait for it to get in range, and fire. But the creature doesn't stop its advance, so they fire again, and again, until finally, its very particles begin harmlessly dissipating into the air. So just like that, it's been defeated, and the giddy Wasp can't contain her excitement, as she suddenly hugs Ant-Man. For a moment he indulges her embrace, until he realizes what's going on, and shoves her away. He tells her that such a display of emotion is improper, and pretends that he doesn't have feelings for her, although she can see right through his stoic facade. Regardless, the issue subsequently ends as we see Ant-Man back at his lab, on a call with the FBI. They want to work with him, as they remark that he can't keep going it alone. But he tells them that there's no need for a partnership, as he's already found himself a worthy partner in the Wasp. That concludes the Ant-Man story in Tales to Astonish 44, and another episode of the Classic Comic Archive. But as always, I would like to offer a brief review of this issue. Overall, I thought that this was a fairly bland story, but a solid introduction to the Wasp. Her lively attitude brings something that's been missing from this series, as honestly, Hank Pym just hasn't been that interesting of a character. He's never had a particularly compelling personality, background, or motivation. This issue remedies some of that, as we're finally given a look at his past, and he's given a partner to develop a personal relationship with. With that being said, I'm curious how they're going to reconcile the whole Wasp is a child thing. It's obvious they're gonna get together one day, but hopefully it's later rather than sooner. As for the villain of the story, it was completely forgettable. But as a vehicle to introduce the Wasp, it worked well enough. But in any case, let me know what you thought of this issue and the video, and feel free to suggest other classic comics for me to cover. Thanks for watching.